one who wills the whole structure to function, the one who wills the mind to function, the speech to function, the breath to function, the body to function, the one who wills must be separate from all this Karyakarana Sanghatam. And I have no doubt about it. The student says there must be someone, because any Sanghata is for someone who is different from Sanghata. Sanghata means we collect always things for someone who is free from collection. Like house is a collection of things, but it's not for itself. It's always for someone who is free from the house, who is detached from the house, is separate from the house. Similarly, this entire Karyakarana Sanghatam must be for someone and also must be willed by someone, and therefore it may not be independent. It's not independent. Well, depends upon someone. Well, who is that being? Dependent upon whom and for whom the entire Karyakarana Sanghatam functions. And therefore the very question, Prashna Samarthyam, the strength of the question is, on the very strength of the question, when the student asks this question as to, well, who is that by which everything functions, well, he is thinking of someone who is separate from Karyakarana Sanghatam. And therefore, the question does not go against the Prasiddhi. The question includes the Prasiddhi, and over and above Prasiddhi is there someone by whom this Karyakarana Sanghatam functions. It cannot be independent, it has to be dependent upon someone. Who is that someone? Because of whom Manaha Patati, so Vachaha, so Vadati, Chakshuhu Pashyati, Shrotram Shunoti, all these things. That is the Prashna Samarthyam. Because if the student asks the question, by whom does the mind function, vagaira, if he asks this question, if the teacher also replies, by individual will mind functions, then individual will is Prasiddham, is it not? That there is individual will is Prasiddham. Over and above the individual will is there something, because individual will also is a part of Karyakarana Sanghatam. Therefore, he wants a question, what is it really, desired by whom, prompted by whom? There is individual will. The individual will itself is due to what? So, Manaha Patati, Chakshuhu Pashyati, these 3-4 things are nothing but an Upalakshanam for the entire Jivatva. For the entire thing, because one detail in the Jiva is not more real than another detail in the Jiva. All of them are equally real. Therefore, if you ask for an explanation of one detail within the Jiva cannot be an explanation of another detail within Jiva. Therefore, you can't say the functioning of the mind is due to the individual will. Why? Because the individual will is also a part of the thinking, the breath, the seeing, the hearing, vagaira. All these things are nothing but the various details within Jiva. Therefore, when the student asks the question, he wants an explanation for the functioning of the individual will. The individual choice itself functions because of whom. And then we develop the topic that the one because of whom the individual will itself functions, the mind functions, the breath functions, because of whom that being, even though it is used, the Ichha Matrena, by his mere desire, we have to take it as by his mere presence. Why? Because the one because of whom the individual will functions cannot have a will. If he also have a will, then he also becomes an individual. Not able to hear? If he also have a will, then he will also be an individual. You cannot have a will and still not be an individual. If this is understood, many religious superstitions themselves will go away. Simple baat samajhenge to all theologies are just gone. Bhagavan cannot have a will, full stop. Bhagavan cannot have a will. If he has a will, then he will become Jiva. Is it not? He will be a Jiva. And it is very difficult for a Bhakta or a fanatic or a fundamentalist or a religious person to accept a Bhagavan without a will. क्या भगवान है अपना will ही नहीं है. He has no choice. Like a pot has no choice. It has to remain a pot. It can't move. It can't talk. It can't see. Like a statue has no choice. Bhagavan also has no choice. Like a statue. क्या भगवान है? हमारा भगवान तो ऐसा नहीं. He can think. He can decide. He can bless. He can curse also. More curse than bless. And therefore, Bhagavan means, generally most of the people who believe in theology, they always think of Bhagavan, they shudder to think of Bhagavan without a will, without a mind, without a will. And it is very pleasing, to think of Bhagavan having a mind. Because I can ask things, he can look, I can imagine that he is looking at me, he is thinking about me, he is all trying to correct my situation. Bhagavan, so we always create Bhagavan in our own image. It is true. It is true. If Bhagavan has created man in his image, I tell you, man has created Bhagavan more perfectly in his own image. Bhagavan creates man in his image. Man creates Bhagavan in his image. As an individual, I look upon Bhagavan as an individual. Therefore, the one who has a will is always an individual, and in order not to be an individual, he should not have will, ichha. Therefore, the one by whom the mind functions vagaira, that being, even though kena, so kena ishitam patati preshitam manaha, ishitam and preshitam, both adjectives, Shankara resolved them in the sense of mere presence. Why? Because by whose will the will functions, if he has a will, then he also becomes an individual. Then his will also must be prompted by another, and he also has a will, and then he should have another presence. ये सब गड़बड़ ना होने के कारण से we say by whose presence does the individual will function, by whose presence does the mind function. Now organize the question now. What is the student's question? By whose presence does the mind function? By whose presence does the breath function? By whose presence do the sense organs perceive? By whose presence does the body function? Up to this we have seen. Now, page number 28. You will see in the notes. Evamapi, even then, even if you take this meaning, preshita shabdasya arthaha na pradarshitaha eva. Ichha matrena means by mere presence. All right, Ishitam you have explained. Ishitam means what? Desired by whom? Willed by whom? And then by mere presence. So presence is not threefold. Presence is always onefold. It is not by will, presence by will, presence by desire, presence by word, presence by action. But presence by desire, presence by word, presence by action नहीं होता है. Promptitude by desire, promptitude by word, promptitude by action. Prompting by desire, prompting by word, prompting by action. So now Ishitam can be understood by whose mere desire. By whose mere desire means by whose mere presence. All right, that is understood. If Ishitam means by whose mere presence, acceptable, then why the word preshitam? How we are going to explain? Preshitam. Therefore, preshita shabdasya, preshita shabdaka, Arthaha, the meaning, na pradarshitaha eva, has not been shown. Purva Pakshi says, hey Siddhanti, you have not shown, you have not given the meaning of the word preshitam. You have explained the word ishitam, but you have not given the meaning of preshitam. Because preshitam, the moment you say, it has to be, preshana is always by desire, word and action. But ichha also requires a mind vagaira. No. Ichha matrena means by mere presence. That can be resolved. Kena ishitam can mean by whose mere desire, by whose mere will, meaning by whose mere presence. By whose mere presence. But preshitam cannot be by whose mere presence, but by whose desire. Desired by whom, prompted by thought, prompted by word, prompted by deed. These things you have to explain. And that means all these things should be possible. Prompting by word, prompting by thought, prompting by action should be possible in that being. I know, in that being. In that being all these things should be possible. That cannot be accepted. That cannot be accepted. For that here it says, na. Aisa nahi. It is not that I have not shown the meaning. It's not that the word preshitam remains unexplained. Na means what? It is not that the word preshitam remains unexplained. Samshayavatoyam prashnaha. This prashnaha, this particular question is entertained by that person who has got a doubt regarding the mind vagaira, regarding the mind, etc. Are they independent? Do they prompt themselves? Or are they prompted by someone? Keeping in view the function of the mind, etc., he thinks like this. Do the mind, etc., prompt themselves, or are they prompted by someone? This doubt, the one who has, samshayavataha, ayam prashnaha. This is a question entertained by a person who has a doubt regarding the functioning on the part of mind, etc. What kind of doubt he has got? Are they independent in their being prompted, or are they prompted by someone? He has got a doubt that they are prompted. The teacher is not going to explain that they are prompted, but the student is thinking that they are prompted. Do they prompt themselves, or are they prompted by someone? Now the teacher is not going to explain they are prompted by. It is not the teacher who says they are prompted by Atma. The teacher is not going to say that they are prompted by Atma. The student only asks a question, do they prompt themselves, or are they prompted by someone? Therefore, this particular word prompting is whose creation? It is a student's creation. Being prompted by whom? Being prompted by whom? This is a question entertained by the student. Supposing it is a teacher's answer, then it means clearly that Atma has certain instrument by which it keeps on prompting the mind vagaira. The teacher is going to tell only Atma's presence is enough for the mind to function, for the breath to function, for the senses to function, for the body to function. The Shruti is going to reveal the presence of Atma behind all of them. but not the Atmas being able to prompt them. The Shruti is not going to reveal Atma's prompting of them. Shruti is going to reveal only Atma's presence behind them. Whereas the student is thinking, he is not thinking in terms of the presence of something, he is thinking that do they prompt themselves or are they prompted by someone? But ultimately the teacher is going to say it is not really that they are all, neither do they prompt themselves, nor are they prompted by Atma, but they all get prompted by mere presence of, they all get functioning, they get going only by the presence of Atma. Therefore, samshayavatoyam prashnaha iti. ये प्रश्न तो संशयवान का है, जैसे कि प्रेषित शब्दस्य अर्थ विशेषः उपपद्यते. प्रेषित शब्दस्य, because it is a question entertained by the one who has a doubt, therefore the word preshita can have a different meaning from the vachyam, the accepted meaning of the word preshitam. Preshita shabdasya, preshita shabdaka, the word preshitam, artha visheshaha, a different meaning. Artha visheshaha means a different meaning from what is accepted as the meaning of the word preshita. What is the accepted meaning of the word preshita? Prompting by will, prompting by word, prompting by action. This is what is called ichchaya preshana, vacha preshana as we saw before, and karmana preshana. Even though this is the accepted meaning of the word preshana, but that's not being accepted here because it is not a word used, it is not used by the teacher, it is not used by the Shastra, but it is used by the student who has the doubt regarding the functioning and the part of all of them. Therefore, its meaning can be taken differently. How? Preshita shabdasya artha visheshaha upapadyate. Upadya means is possible. It is possible to get a different meaning for the word preshana, preshita. It is proper, it is tenable to get a different meaning for the word preshitam because it is given by, it is used by a student who has a doubt. How? What is the doubt? Kim kya yatha prasiddhameva, as it is known, karyakarana sanghatasya, karyakarana sanghataka, preshayitritvam is the prompter. Is karyakarana sanghatam itself has the status of being the prompter of itself? Does the karyakarana sanghatam itself prompts itself? Means what? Mind decides to think. The individual will itself decides the mind to function, the breath to function, the senses to function, the body to function. That means as the one whole. Individual will is not something higher than mind vagara. Everything, all details, like in the dream, you have got many details. Which detail is more true? Which detail is more true? You got a lottery. Last night you went to dream and you got a lottery. That is more true. You bought a lottery ticket. Then you saw the paper and you got money. Lot of money. Dream to bahut aasan hai. Now which is real? Buying lottery is more real and gaining money is more real, and your tears now that it's all dream is more real. Your tears are more real. I have woken up. I should have stayed there. It is all dream. Therefore, within the dream, every detail is the same within the dream. Therefore, individual will also has to be a part of karyakarana sanghatam. Therefore, does the karyakarana sanghatam prompt itself or is it prompted by someone? That is the doubt. Therefore, karyakarana sanghatasya preshayitritvam itself is the prompter, kimva, or sanghata vyatiriktasya, what is other than karyakarana sanghatam, swatantrasya, which is independent by itself. A being which is separate from Karyakarana Sanghatam and which is Swatantram. Because Karyakarana Sanghatam cannot be Swatantram. Karyakarana Sanghatam, there are reasons why Karyakarana Sanghatam cannot be Swatantram, because it is always any Sanghatam is Paratantram. It depends upon something, it depends upon something and it is meant for something. Anyway, now here, does the Karyakarana Sanghatam prompt itself, or is there someone who is other than Karyakarana Sanghatam, which is independent? Ichha matrenaiva, by his mere desire, means by his mere presence. Ichha matram always should be not taken as desire or anything, by his mere presence. Ichha matrenaiva, by his mere presence. Ichha matrenaiva. Because are we to establish, is the scripture trying to establish the presence of something which is other than Karyakarana Sanghatam, or are we to establish the Ichha as an attribute of that Atma? What is meant to be revealed? Is it to be, what is meant to be revealed here? Does the Shruti want to reveal a being which is separate from Karyakarana Sanghatam, or is it does it have to prove Ichha in that being? What does the Shruti want to prove? What does the Shruti want to reveal? Does it want to reveal an Atma separate from Karyakarana Sanghatam? Or does it want to reveal an Ichha in Atma? No, Atma is separate from Deha, that is true. But what does the Shruti want to reveal? Shruti wants to reveal that there is something which is other than Karyakarana Sanghatam. It is not interested in revealing any Ichha in that Atma. Because the very Astitvam is that to be established, is it not? It is the Astitvam, it is the presence of a being other than Karyakarana Sanghatam that has to be established. What is to be established is not Ichha in Atma. What is to be established, what is to be revealed is not Ichha. Therefore, the whole effort is to prove the presence of something which is other than Karyakarana Sanghatam. That the Karyakarana Sanghatam is not independent, but it presupposes the being. There is Karyakarana Sanghatam is not independent, but there is a being because of whose presence Karyakarana Sanghatam is functioning. Thus, what is to be established is a being which is separate from Karyakarana Sanghatam and by whose presence Karyakarana Sanghatam functions. Therefore, the effort is not to prove the Ichha in Atma, but to prove Atma. The effort is not to prove Ichha in Atma, but it's not to prove the will in Atma. The effort is not to prove the will in Atma, the effort is not to prove the Ichha in Atma, but the effort is to prove the Astitvam of Atma as separate from Karyakarana Sanghatam. That is what is to be revealed. Therefore, Ichha Matrena Eva means what here? By mere presence. Ichha Matrena Eva. Mana Adi Preshayitritvam. Mind, etc. become, they start prompting themselves. Mind, etc., do they prompt themselves independently, or due to the presence of something, do they prompt themselves? Karyakarana Sanghatam, does it prompt itself by itself, or does it prompt itself due to the presence of something which is separate from Karyakarana Sanghatam? But anyway, the prerana is only from the Karyakarana Sanghatam. Karyakarana Sanghatam prompts itself independently, or does it prompt itself involving the presence of Atma or something which is separate from Karyakarana Sanghatam. Therefore, Manadi Preshayatritvam. This is the doubt. What is the doubt now? Karyakarana Sanghatam prompts itself independently, or does it prompt itself presupposing some being by whose mere ichcha, means by whose mere presence, Karyakarana Sanghatam prompts itself. So what is really common to both? What is common to both? Karyakarana Sanghatam prompts itself. Does Karyakarana Sanghatam prompts itself? Does the Karyakarana Sanghatam prompt itself independently? Or does it prompt itself presupposing the presence of something which is separate from Karyakarana Sanghatam? Iti doubt in the mind of the student. Therefore, ichcha matrena yumanadi preshayatritvam ityasya arthasya isi arthaka प्रदर्शनार्थम. इस डाउट को दिखाने के लिए इत्यस्य अर्थस्य प्रदर्शनार्थम. दिस इज द मीनिंग ऑफ द वर्ड प्रेषितम. द वर्ड प्रेषितम implies this doubt. What is this doubt? Does the Karyakarana Sanghatam prompt itself by itself independently, or does it prompt itself involving the presence of something? Is the meaning of the word preshitam, but it does not imply being prompted by will, being prompted by word, being prompted by karma. The question of karmana preshitam, vacha preshitam, sankalpena preshitam, ichchaya preshitam, these details don't come into the picture. They don't come into the picture. Why? Because if they prompt themselves, like even if Karyakarana Sanghatam prompts itself by itself independently, then, well, it prompts itself by its own will, by its own word, by its own action. No contradiction? No समझ हम लोगों को समझ में नहीं आया. There is nothing ना समझ में आने के लिए. If Karyakarana Sanghatam prompts itself by itself independent of any other presence, then it has to prompt itself by will, by word, by action, and that's what's happening now. How do you prompt yourself? By will, by word, by action. Suppose you take the other vikalpa. If the Karyakarana Sanghatam prompts itself involving the presence of something else which is separate from Karyakarana Sanghatam, there we are not attributing to that being the instruments of the methods of prompting. That's why we are saying by whose mere ichcha, means by whose mere presence. Therefore, we don't attribute to that being either will or word or action, because we are saying Karyakarana Sanghatam prompts itself through word, through will, through action, involving the presence of something. Therefore, if the Karyakarana Sanghatam prompts itself independent of anything else, then it prompts itself through will, word, action. If it prompts itself again involving the presence of something, then also it has to prompt itself through its own will, word and action. In any case, the will, word and action do not get attributed to the being whose ichcha matra se hi sab chalta hai. Means what? By whose presence itself everything moves. Do you understand? Therefore, what is the meaning of the word preshitam? The meaning of the word preshitam is this, that the student wants to know whether the Karyakarana Sanghatam is independent in its prompting itself, or does it prompt itself depending upon the presence of something. Itna hi baat hai. That difference, that doubt is highlighted by the word preshitam. Preshitam, the word, does not involve action, will and word as the attributes of that being. You have to follow very fast. Ityasya arthasya pradarshanartham yeneshitam patati. Yena ishitam patati. In order to show this meaning, yena by whom, ishitam desired, willed by whom, preshitam manaha mind gets prompted. Mind gets prompted. Desired by whom does the mind get prompted? Desired by whom means what? The being is the one who merely wills, and by his mere will the mind gets prompted, the breath gets prompted, and everything gets prompted, everything starts functioning. By his mere will. By his mere will means by his mere presence. Preshitam manaha iti visheshana dvayam upapadyate. Visheshana dvayam means two visheshanas are possible. One visheshanam is ishitam, the other visheshanam is preshitam. Ishitam is applied to, ishitam is an adjective of the being, preshitam is an adjective of Karyakarana Sanghata. Desired by whom does the Karyakarana Sanghatam get prompted? Means it prompts itself should be taken. Because Shankara has given Preshayitritvam as the quality of the Karyakarana Sanghatam. So Karyakarana Sanghatam itself becomes the Preshaka. Not able to follow? The prompter is looked upon in any case. The prompter is Karyakarana Sanghatam. Now the whole question is, does the Karyakarana Sanghatam prompt itself? Because it's Prasiddham, you know. What is Prasiddham? Karyakarana Sanghatam itself being the prompter of itself is Prasiddham. Usme to koi na. Somebody else is doing. How did you come to Ramana Kendra? Swamiji, from within something told me, you go to Ramana Kendra. Therefore I came to Ramana Kendra. Don't do like that. Tomorrow something else will come. You go to Rishikesh. If you start listening to inner voices, I tell you that inner voice is a very deceptive voice. All inner voices are deceptive. Outer voice is more reliable. That is why it says Shabda Pramanam. And that too Shabdam that comes from a teacher who is not you, who is outside you. If the Shabdam comes from within, if the message comes from within, that will be dangerous. So from within somebody told me, go to Rishikesh, I went to Rishikesh. From there you will say to go to Gangotri. Inner voice ka koi ye nahi. How did you come here? You willed, you came. Therefore Karyakarana Sanghatam. You willed to come, you came. Therefore what is evident to us? Some unknown thing forcing us, or only the known thing? Known thing. We don't see any other will. We don't see any andar se koi will nahi. It is my will by which I act. It is by my will. I sit down, I stand up, I walk, I talk, I sleep, I get up, I do, I come, I go. Everything is done by what? Karyakarana Sanghatam. Therefore, Karyakarana Sanghatam prompting itself is Prasiddham. Now what is the doubt? What should be the doubt now? Karyakarana Sanghatam prompting itself is Prasiddham. Then what should be the doubt? Does the Karyakarana Sanghatam prompt itself independently, or does it prompt itself involving something else? That's all now. Therefore here there are two vikalpas, Karyakarana Sanghatam prompting itself independently, and the second vikalpa is Karyakarana Sanghatam prompting itself involving the presence of something. And therefore these two Visheshanas are not irrelevant. Please write down. I don't think it is still clear. Next classes, as we proceed, we will make it clear. Clear? What is the last line? not say for 10 years. Till 10 years has not gone to school. Then till then he looks illiterate. By his looks you can find out he has not gone to school. His mind is illiterate, his behavior is illiterate, the whole individual is raw, illiterate. The moment he starts going to school, the very expression of his face changes. The way he looks changes. The way he speaks changes. The way he thinks changes. Education brings about change in a person. That very facial expression, you can figure out that he is going to school. He is a school-going child. If he is not going to school, then you can't figure out. You can find out that illiteracy writ large on the face. Literacy, you can find out writ large on the face. You can't miss it. In this, how a person becomes more and more profound as he goes to school, a person becomes more and more profound in his thinking. Compared to his previous situation, becomes more and more profound. In the same manner, a person comes to Shastram. As he starts studying Shastram, then he is thinking about the values of life, the purpose of life, the whole vision about himself and the Veda and the universe. So his whole thinking about it becomes more and more profound. How as educated man, how he is always free from the superstitions in our day-to-day life. Empirical superstitions. How an educated man just brushes aside empirical superstitions. He is not gullible, he is not. He is out of gullibility. He is out of superstitions. In the same manner, a person who comes to the Shastram, he becomes free from the superstitions about spirituality, about what is Bhagavan, what is truth, what is spirituality, what is moksha, what is the fundamental thing that man wants. So, about the fundamental pursuit, he becomes free from superstition because he is educated about this realm. How an educated person becomes superstitions of the empirical day-to-day world, one who studies Shastram also becomes free from superstitions about what the Tattva means, is profound. How the education you feel when you become educated, you feel the educatedness about you. Similarly, when you come to the Shastram, you feel that knowledge. You feel you are different. You see the difference. You see the difference between studying Shastra and not studying Shastra, please. How there is difference clearly seen between literacy and illiteracy. Similarly, there is a difference between studying Shastra and not studying Shastra. And therefore, as far as spirituality is concerned, not studying Shastra means total illiteracy. Total illiteracy. One is totally in the dark. Therefore, Shastra ko padhna chahiye. Okay, now our topic is different. Our topic ye hai, we were doing the cause and effect that is called Karyakarana Sanghatam, called the embodiment, body, breath, mind, intellect, vagera. All these things are not really independent in their functioning. They seem to conduct this entire Karyakarana Sanghatam seems to conduct itself independently, but actually it doesn't conduct itself independently, but it involves a being which is not a part of Karyakarana Sanghatam. That being is because of the presence of that being, there is individual body, individual breath, individual sense organs and individual will also. That being whose presence is necessary for the entire Karyakarana Sanghatam to function, for the mind to function, senses to perceive, etc., that being has no will. How that being has no will at all is brought about very well in the Vakya Bhashya. Shankara deals with that, how the Atma has no will. He just explains these words very well, doesn't go into unnecessary details. He says, it is all upama arthaha, as we are going to see. There is no such thing, Atma prompts the mind or Atma prompts the sense organs, Atma prompts. Atma's presence is required. In all these classes, what have we been emphasizing? We have been emphasizing that the Atma whose presence is required for the individual will to function, the mind to function, the senses to function, that being, the Atma, has no will. Has no will. That is brought about in the, its presence is what is to be discovered. We are not trying to discover the will of that Atma, we are trying to discover the presence. The student wants to know the presence of the truth, not the will of the truth. It will come. Now, another question comes now. Nanu swatantram manaha swavishaye swayam patati iti prasiddham. Nanu, Purvapakshi says, swatantram manaha, a mind is independent, an independent mind independently, swavishaye, apni apni vishay mein, swayam patati, it falls. Mind itself thinks of its objects independently. Mind thinks of its own objects, mind thinks of its objects independently. Purvapakshi is telling, mind is independent, mind is free to think, mind is free to like, mind is free to dislike, mind is free to do this, do that. Therefore, swatantram manaha swavishaye swayam patati iti prasiddham, eto prasiddha hai. Tatra, therefore, there in that matter, katham prashnaha upapadyate iti. Therefore, how can one raise a doubt, is it swatantram or not? How can one doubt the freedom of the mind? If the freedom of the mind is in doubt, then you can ask a question, what is that being because of whom the mind functions? You can ask a doubt as to because of what, because of whose presence does the mind function? Because of whose presence does the mind function? This question you can ask when you have a doubt about the freedom of the mind. It is only when you understand, it is only when you have a doubt about the independence of the mind. Is mind independent or not? It doesn't seem to be independent. It must have someone behind him, behind the mind, because of whose presence the mind must be functioning. So you can ask a question about the presence, about the Atma behind the mind only when the independence of the mind is in doubt. If you think that mind is not independent, then you can ask a question, because of whose dependency does the mind, because of whose presence does the mind function? Now this doubt is not relevant according to Purvapakshi, because it is very clear, it is very evident that the mind is independent. It is very evident. Purvapakshi is questioning the very relevance of the doubt. Previously he questioned the nature of the answer. The answer he doubted, now the Purvapakshi is questioning the relevance of the very question. Why should anybody ask a question? How can anybody ask a question like this? Because of whom does the mind function? This question is not relevant, because it is very evident that the mind is independent in its thinking. You will to think, you will not to think, you will to see, you will to hear, you will to taste, touch, smell. The mind is free. Therefore, tatra katham prashnaha upapadyate. How this particular question is relevant? First of all, the student's question itself is not relevant. Mind is not dependent upon anything. Mind is independent. Mind doesn't depend upon any Atma or Brahma. Mind is independent. It wills to see, hear, taste, touch, smell. It wills to wake up, it wills to sleep. Iti Purvapakshaha. For that he says, Uchyate, the answer is given. Yadi, the answer is like this. Yadi in case, Swatantram Manaha, if the mind is independent, Pravrutti Nivrutti Vishaye Syatham. Syat, not Syatham, Syat. If mind is independent in the matter of Pravrutti and Nivrutti. Pravrutti Nivrutti Vishaya means what? What to do and what not to do. To do is what is called Pravrutti, not to do is what is called Nivrutti. So in what to do and what not to do, in this matter if the mind has freedom, if the mind is independent, then Tarihi, then Sarvasya Anishta Chintanam Nasyat. Then nobody will have Anishta Chintanam. Then nobody will